Hello, Psychology of Learning students. So we are now at the beginning of week 6, believe it or not. You've taken your first exam covering chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you've now learned everything you need to know about classical conditioning, or at least most of it. So the next exam is going to cover chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, and even 2 chapters that'll be on the third exam, 9 and 10, all cover operant conditioning. So I want to start this chapter by talking about giving you an overview of operant conditioning, much like the overview that you had when you took general psychology. But I realize that for some of you, general psychology might be many years ago. So I would like to give this overview. So if we think about operant learning or operant conditioning, and this is what happens. The organism is in some kind of a situation. Maybe it's a Friday night and you have a really bad headache. In this situation, the organism is going to do some kind of behavior. They're going to perform a behavior. Now think about how that's different from classical conditioning when it's a response, not a behavior. Okay, so the response is automatic, something that's like inborn. These are behaviors that are willful, for lack of a better word. There's something that you actually do. So maybe on this Friday night with a headache, that's the situation, my behavior is going to be that I'm going to take 2 Advil, pop them in my mouth, and swallow them with some water. So my behavior is that I'm taking Advil. Now this behavior could be followed by a consequence. Maybe a half hour later, my headache goes away. Now, because this consequence followed the behavior, in other words, because an association was made between the behavior and the consequence, now there's going to be an increase in my likelihood of doing that behavior, taking the Advil, when I'm in that situation again, having a headache. So in operant conditioning, because the consequence is paired with the behavior, because the consequence follows the behavior, the consequence is associated with the behavior, that association is learned, there's going to be an increase or a decrease in the likelihood of the behavior being done again in that situation. Now there are 4 different types of consequences: positive reinforcers, negative reinforcers, positive punishers, and negative punishers. Reinforcers will always increase the likelihood of the behavior being done again in that situation, whereas punishers will always decrease the likelihood of the behavior being done again in that situation. Positive things means that as part of the consequence, something is given to the organism. Negative means something is taken away from the organism. So positive doesn't mean good and negative means bad. It means, like on a number line, something is added to, that's positive, or subtracted from, negative. Think of like a minus sign, looks like a negative sign. So negative. Positive, something's given. Negative, something's taken away. So let's go through some concrete examples for each of these. Let's say the situation is that my son's room is a horrible mess. And his behavior is he goes in there and he cleans it up. He organizes everything and puts it in piles and puts his clothes away. The consequence might be that I walk in there and go, "George, what a great job you did. Look, you cleaned your room. I'm so proud of you, my neat little boy." And I give him a big hug. If my praising him increases the likelihood of him cleaning his room next time it's a mess, then my praising him was a positive reinforcer. Something I gave him praise that increased the likelihood of him doing that same behavior in that situation again. A good example of a negative reinforcer was the example that I used with the headache. So the situation is it's Friday night and you have a bad headache. The behavior is you take some Advil. The consequence is your headache goes away, and that increases the likelihood of you taking Advil next time you have a headache. That's a negative reinforcer. Something's taken away, the headache, that increases the likelihood of doing that behavior again in that situation. Let's think now about a positive punisher. Let's say the situation is you and your child are walking through Walmart, and your child's behavior is she goes, "I want candy, I want candy, I want candy." And you pop her on the butt. You give her a little spanking. Let's say that leads to a decrease in her saying, "I want candy, I want candy, I want candy," the next couple of times that you're in Walmart. Then your popping her on the butt, giving her a spanking, worked as a positive punisher with something that you gave her, a spanking, and it decreased the likelihood of her saying, I want candy, next time that she's in that situation. Let's do an example of a negative punisher. Let's say the situation is that in your family, you have curfews set for your kids, your adolescents, where on Friday nights they need to be home by 12. And your son comes home at 12:30. He breaks curfew. That's his behavior. And your consequence is you tell him he cannot go out on Saturday night, and next Friday and Saturday night, he cannot go out with his friends either. If that punishment, I'm sorry, I shouldn't call it punishment. If that consequence of saying you can't go out tomorrow night or next Friday or Saturday night, if that decreases the likelihood of him breaking curfew again when he is able to go out again, then that consequence was a negative punisher. It was something that was taken away from him, the ability to go out Saturday night and the following Friday and Saturday night. And it decreased the likelihood of him doing that behavior, staying out past curfew, again in the future. Does that kind of make sense? So that's a nice overview of the next 4 or 5 chapters. Now let's get back to just talking about chapter 5. So in this chapter, and actually chapter 6 also, we're just going to talk about reinforcements. We're not going to talk about punishments yet. So let me share the screen, and I'm going to go to these wonderful PowerPoint slides that Dr. Stephanie Stern created. So if you see her, she gets the thanks for doing this. Okay, so, and these PowerPoint slides are available to you under course content. When you click on the Chapter 5 materials, you'll see the very first link are these PowerPoint slides. So in this video, we just did the introduction to operant learning. You saw that. And we're going to talk about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. In the second video, I'm going to talk about the different types of reinforcers and characteristics of a reinforcer. All right, so I want to talk now about 2 theorists that did the groundbreaking work for operant learning. And you really need to know who they are and what they did, especially if you're a psychology major. This is stuff that we would expect all psychology majors to know. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Edward Lee Thorndike. And he was the one he really tried to understand how behavior comes from understanding learning. So he is the one who called 2 possible outcomes of behavior as satisfying states of affair or annoying states of affair. And he believed that when organisms reach satisfying states of affairs, that behaviors that came before that are going to be strengthened and more likely to occur in the future. And behaviors that lead to annoying states of affair are going to be lessened or weakened, and the organism will be less likely to repeat those. Now, he did a lot of his research with the use of what became known as puzzle boxes. And this is what a puzzle box would look like. He worked with cats a lot. And so in this puzzle box, sometimes there were levers that the cat would need to pull. Sometimes there were buttons that the cat would need to push. But if the cat did whatever the behavior was that he needed, then this little door would rise up and the cat would be able to get out of the box, which to the cat would be a satisfying state of affairs, especially if right outside the box there was some food even. And so initially when you would put a cat in the box, the cat would scratch and try to squeeze around and squeeze through and do all these things, but nothing would happen. And then oftentimes, just by chance, the cat would either pull the lever or push the button, and the door would go up. And Thorndike would notice that if you put the cat in there again, it didn't take the cat quite as long to figure out what he needed to do next to get out. And then the 3rd time and the 4th time. And in no time at all, the cat would learn as soon as you put him in there that either pull the lever or push the button, whatever he was training the cat to do. Okay, so that is Thorndike. And he came up with what's called the law of effect. And this is basically, it highlights the relationship between the behavior and the consequence. And I love what your book does on page 130. I think they do such a good job defining the law of effect. Of several responses made to the same situation, Those which are accompanied or closely followed by satisfaction to the animal will, other things being equal, be more firmly connected with the situation so that when it recurs, they will be more likely to recur. Those which are accompanied or closely followed by discomfort to the animal will, other things being equal, have their connections with that situation weaken so that when it recurs, they will be less likely to occur. So that's the law of effect. And you can see that with the law of effect, there are 4 elements in the relationship: the environment or the situation, the behavior, the change in the environment, and the change in the behavior. Oops, that should say change, not chance. I'll make that change. Okay. Now, Skinner, B.F. Skinner, is the next huge theorist that comes along, and you really need to know who B.F. Skinner is. So B.F. Skinner came up with something that's similar to the puzzle box, but it was a box. He did most of his work with rats or mice. And at the bottom of the box was wires so that he could give a shock to the mice through this electric grid. There were food pellets, there was a lever here. Oftentimes there were signal lights, and if he was trying to teach, let's say, the mice to press the lever only when a red light occurred, then if the red light was there and the lever was pressed, then a food pellet would come out here. And so this is what the Skinner box looked like. Now, B.F. Skinner is so famous that there's those free courses that you can take called Coursera. It looks like course with RA at the end. If you take the general psychology free, or maybe it's called Introduction to Psychology, free Coursera course, the person who teaches it from Yale University, he will say how Skinner and Freud, he believes, are the 2 theorists who made psychology what it is today. That without Skinner and Freud, the discipline of psychology would look completely different than it does. So that's high praise. So Thorndike and Skinner are 2 huge theorists in helping us understand and create operant learning or operant conditioning. So, what is operant learning? Any learning that results from the relationship between a behavior and its consequences. And the association between the behavior and the consequences, that behavior being done again is either strengthened or weakened based on that association, based on the consequences that follow it. And it's different from classical conditioning because these behaviors are not reflexes. They're not automatic responses. These are behaviors that have to be done first and then are followed by consequences. Think about how different that is than the dog, Pavlov's dog, where the sound comes before the dog salivates. So the association there is between the CS and the US before the response even happens. This is the response, and then what happens after it is what either strengthens or weakens the response. So they're very different. As we talked already, there are 4 types of operant conditioning: reinforcement, which positive and negative reinforcement, and then punishment, positive and negative punishments. Reinforcers strengthen the behavior, make it more likely that the organism will give that behavior in that situation. Punishers decrease it. They weaken the behavior. They make it less likely for the organism to repeat that behavior in that same situation. And as we talked about before, positive means something is given, negative means something is taken away. So here are some reinforcements we could talk about. Great job. Thanks for all you do. You rock. You're awesome. So an increase in the strength of the behavior is going to be a reinforcer, and it's due to the behavior's consequence, the behavior having the consequence. So there are 3 characteristics of reinforcement. First, the behavior must have a consequence. Second, the behavior must increase in that situation. The likelihood of that behavior must increase. And that increase must be the result of the consequence. In other words, the behavior wasn't increased just randomly. It was because it was followed by that consequence, because of that association. That's what made the behavior change, then we're going to call that consequence a reinforcer. Okay. With positive reinforcers, something is added to the environment that increases the behavior. Praise or money or a dog bone, food. Positive reinforcers can include, well, we already said this, any stimulus that will increase or add to the organism's behavior. The stimuli does not have to be pleasant or enjoyable. So if you said bad dog and your dog was more likely to do it, it's positive reinforcer. If you shock the rat and that increased the likelihood of the rat doing it, that would be a positive reinforcer. Anything that's given to the organism that increases the likelihood of them doing that behavior again. Negative reinforcement, something is taken away from the organism and it increases the likelihood of them doing it again. So here you get out of prison, that's something being taken away. I don't know if your brother used to put you into these holds and make you say uncle or something. What's being taken away here, once you say uncle, then what's taken away is the restraint of him holding you in a chokehold. I love this illustration from Dr. Stephanie Stern's slides about taking a shower. If you take a shower, what is taken away? All of the slime on your skin or any sweat that you have. So taking a shower can be so negatively reinforcing because you've got that grime taken off of you and it feels so good. Negative reinforcers, as we said, are stimuli that decrease or remove something that makes the behavior be more likely to occur. Escape learning is a perfect example of negative reinforcement. We learn to do a behavior because it helps us to avoid something unpleasant. So, well, that is all that I wanted to cover in this first video, and I'll post the second video talking about the different types of reinforcers and the characteristics of a reinforcer in the next video. If you have any questions, be sure to email me, maryd@cameron.edu. Thank you.